Sony's secret plan. We have a little almost conspiracy going here, Tony, about what Sony's next move is and how it could change the entire camera industry.
You think of it as a conspiracy, but I honestly believe that I have uncovered the plan for their next generation of Sony Alpha cameras that will completely turn the entire industry upside down. Maybe even completely destroy Canon and Nikon.
The people at Sony might be like, whoa, Tony's smart, or they might be like, the Northrups are crazy. They've lost it.
We'll tell you about it in just a second. First, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Squarespace. You need a better web presence than just social media. You need a domain that you own, where you can receive emails at northrup.org instead of gmail.com. Go to squarespace.com/Chelsea. You can set up your own website. Choose from one of many professionally designed templates. Choose features like selling things on your stores, booking appointments from clients at squarespace.com/Chelsea completely free. When you love it, the coupon code Chelsea gets you 10% off. That's CHELSEA. Thank you, Squarespace.
Let's get into this because I'm so excited and scared, Tony. Let's talk about Sony's strategy of the week. And it's not week like 7 days a week, it's week like strength.
So this year, just a few months ago, the former group vice chairman of Sony, Shigeki Ishizuka, gave an interview to Nikkei. And he provided a lot of interesting information about Sony's Alpha camera strategy.
Well, let's back this up. We are framing this argument. Tony is making a case here, because not only are we going to tell you about the technology that we think is coming, but we want to look back at what Sony has done already to build a case, because the behavior that we're seeing now from them, we've seen before, and it makes this whole theory more plausible.
Yeah, like if I was a charming Southern lawyer, I would be telling the judge, I'm establishing a history and a method of operation. Okay, that's what this is doing. In 2013, they decided that they were going to be the market leader for interchangeable lens cameras. And at the time, their cameras were terrible. To put that into perspective, in 2014, we reviewed the Sony A7 Mark II. You're going to have to bleep this, Chelsea. But I said the focusing was a piece of and I said it twice because that's how bad the A7 II focused. And in 2016, everybody was talking about how great the A6300 was. We reviewed it, we compared it to our Canon 7D because we did a lot of sports and wildlife, and it was garbage. The Canon was so far ahead.
The autofocusing.
The autofocusing.
Yeah, not the camera itself.
But a lot of what this chairman was talking about was this weakness of autofocusing. And in fact, the interesting part is, he said they intentionally held back the autofocusing. They held it back.
So they were banking technology so that they could come out with something good all at once.
Here's a quote translated from Japanese. He said, I wanted you to think Sony still has a long way to go. Specifically wanted Canon and Nikon to think that mirrorless was not the future, that they should continue down the path of DSLRs. And when did they finally break the news? All this technology that they'd been banking. We were there in 2017 when Sony launched the Sony A9. Do you remember using that mirrorless system for the first time?
Yeah, they put us into an all sports situation. So we had been critical of their autofocusing system and saying that we couldn't use it for sports and wildlife. They put us in this indoor gym and had people running and jumping and throwing things. And we were blown away because the autofocusing was working way better than we thought was possible.
Better than any DSLR. And they were doing 20 frames per second when the competitors maxed out at like 14. It was silent and it was completely blackout free. It made every DSLR seem primitive, and I could not believe the leap that they made from me calling it a piece of shit to it blowing away all of the competition. Where did that come from? It's because it only got revealed this year. They hid it, they banked it, they sandbagged. It was all deliberate. They had better tech that they held back because they wanted to surprise the competition. That's something that Sony is doing right now.
So we think.
So I know. And then in 2018, only months later, they launched the Sony A7 III at $2,000, and that's the camera that flipped the entire market because now that tech was affordable. Everyone realized the benefit of eye detect autofocus, and so many people sold their Canon and Nikon DSLRs and bought the Sony a7 III and brought into that system that now Sony's the number one mirrorless manufacturer, but it's pretty much neck and neck overall between them and Canon.
Well, you have to remember, so 2018, people were still saying that mirrorless cameras were junk. They were toys, they were small, they would never be a professional camera. And 2018 was the year that the D850 launched for Nikon, which was like one of our favorite cameras. So at this point, they had the technology out, but people still weren't 100% sold on mirrorless. And at this point, Canon and Nikon were also dissing mirrorless all the time, saying they weren't real cameras and that they couldn't compete with their DSLRs, just to set the stage.
But then Canon and Nikon both decided to launch their own mirrorless systems a couple of years late because their whole plan worked, right? So to size up how far behind they were because of this, I kind of asked myself, like, when did Canon and Nikon release cameras that focus as well as that 2017 A9? And in my assessment, the Canon R6 released in 2020 was about as good or better, but anything before then was worse. And I don't think Nikon matched it really until 2022 when they had some firmware updates for the Nikon Z9 that I think brought it pretty close. So we're looking at between 3 and 5 years behind Sony because Sony had banked, hidden, sandbagged that technology. Interesting strategy to keep things secret, to hold things back from the consumer just to mislead your competitors. And they're doing it again. And I'm going to tell you what this next big leap is. It's not autofocus. The autofocus, that's fine. That doesn't need to be solved.
No, this is bigger than autofocus.
It's far bigger. First, I want to thank our sponsor, Squarespace.
What a tease, Tony. Whoa, you should do this professionally. If you want your own website, store, portfolio, you need to try out Squarespace because it's so easy to make a professional looking website. If you can drag your pictures in and drop them into a template, you can make something beautiful, functional, easy that won't crash on you or give you any problems at all. You can try it for free. You don't have to even risk anything, no credit card that you need to remember to cancel. Just go to squarespace.com/Chelsea. Use the coupon code Chelsea and you can get 10% off if you decide you want to buy it. And I urge you to do that because I've seen a lot of local websites and they're just not looking good. Squarespace can solve that problem for you. All right. So we've set the stage. Sony has done this before. They have banked technologies that they could make a leap that would leave their competitors struggling to catch up. And you believe that that is happening again. And so this next camera that they're going to come out with, what are you envisioning it will be?
It is going to be not the first smart camera, but the first successful smart camera. A camera built on the Android operating system, but not a smartphone. You're not going to be getting Nextdoor and TikTok notifications on it. We're going to just, it's going to be using the Android operating system as an intelligent platform to replicate the features of your camera while adding intelligent capabilities.
So if that doesn't make any sense to you and you're wondering why that matters and why that's such a big shift, we want to talk about the things that people have been asking for in their cameras and the manufacturers have not been able to deliver because of the software.
Well, one is transferring files, right? We just reviewed the Sony ZV-1 Mark II, brand new camera, and I tried to transfer some files to my smartphone. It was essentially unusable, right? The bandwidth of these cameras, even the new ones, is typically like 1 to 2 megabits per second, whereas my phone will do 700, 800 megabits per second. That's how far behind they are, by a factor of almost 1,000. And the same applies to Bluetooth. Why is there no cellular? Why are there no GPS capabilities when every $200 smartphone has all these capabilities? The real answer is it's very difficult to write all of that code in the camera's current very primitive operating system.
So if this sounds too far advanced for you or too off-putting, or if you're thinking, oh, this is getting far away from photography, this is something our cameras already do, but they're too slow to do it in a way that's satisfying. So think about when you make HDR images in your camera, it will stack 3 photos and then process them, but it doesn't do a very good job. If we were to have a new platform like Android that could process everything faster, we could have better HDR, we could have better computational photography like we're seeing in smartphones now. We could be improving the dynamic range, not by incremental changes to sensors, but by taking the software and blending multiple pictures like your phone already does. So this isn't about impractical, far-fetched photography. This is about making things easier to use and more in line with the technology we're using every single day.
I wanted to give a little background with my experience as a programmer.
Yeah.
I started programming when I was 9, and at the time I was writing what we call 6 to 8,000 assembly language, a very basic, very primitive. And if I wanted to draw a dot on the screen, I had to find that dot's location in memory and then just write a single value there. And if I wanted to draw a box, I had to do some trigonometry to figure out the location of each single box, each single pixel, and then write a 1 in there to turn it on, something like that. That is kind of like the experience that camera developers have today when they decide to integrate a new Bluetooth module or a new Wi-Fi module. They have to go through a lot of manual work. But if you're a smartphone developer for something like Android, there's a driver for that. So you get a new chip, you just grab the drivers, everything interfaces very quickly. And as a result, when Wi-Fi 6 comes out, which no cameras support today, you just plug it in, use it, and a bunch of other open source developers have probably already gotten through a lot of the troubleshooting. Everything goes very smoothly. Camera developers are not taking advantage of any of the last 20 years of development advancements. They're way behind. And as a result, all the software development updates happen very slowly with great difficulty. And that's why you can't log on to Google Drive directly from your camera. That would take 3 lines of code for a smartphone to log onto Google Drive. It would take thousands of lines of code for a camera manufacturer to do it. And then maintaining that, troubleshooting that would be almost impossible. The only answer is to shift to a modern operating system with modern development tools. And the only real option that they would probably have would be Android, which is what so many different devices use. Your thermostats and what are other gadgets?
Your security cameras?
Your thermostats, your Nest security cameras, things like that use Android or something similar.
I think another argument for why the manufacturers why Sony would want to do this is because there's a path to profits. And so if they're on Android, they can have apps where they're going to be selling you things like presets or maybe things in computational photography like AI clothes or something. I mean, I just heard that might be the future. So there is updated storage they could sell you if you wanted another place to keep your photos. So there is a path to profits for them. This makes sense.
As well as providing so many features that people need now, like live streaming. Companies like Panasonic are trying to do that directly from the camera, but the interface is so clumsy and it often just fails. Again, for all the reasons I just stated, because the development is hard, guaranteeing compatibility and keeping things updated is next to impossible. It's never going to succeed unless you change the operating system. But we could get cloud synchronization. So you take a picture, you could get an instant backup to the cloud. And that way, if somebody stole your camera, you wouldn't lose your files. We could also get encryption. So if somebody stole your camera, they wouldn't be able to access your files if you chose to lock them out. If you're shooting Gucci's next season of fashion and it were to be leaked because somebody stole your camera, that would be devastating. It's ridiculous. Camera manufacturers don't provide that. This is how they get there from where they are now.
Okay. So this is the camera that we are arguing is going to exist. It's going to have better software, probably an Android platform, apps, just more connectivity. It might sound far-fetched to people, so we want to talk about how we think a camera company would get there and why this is plausible for Sony, especially.
Yeah, so if you're Canon and Nikon, you start by building out an Android OS because they don't have any such thing. And that means you'd have to hire a bunch of Android developers, right? And app developers too. And you'd have to build a mobile operating system from scratch. And then photographers do not like things to change. They like things to stay the same. That's why if you look at every Canon camera, the little buttons are all in the same place. So you can buy the new camera and feel comfortable with it. The first thing you'd have to do would be to replicate your existing camera user interface so photographers felt comfortable within the mobile operating system. And then you'd have to integrate it with camera hardware, like larger sensors, which they're not currently able to support. Things like the buffers, they would continue to need that. And then, of course, to make it worth upgrading, you'd have to add some new features, things like computational photography, connectivity, transfers. Then you put it into a camera form factor with a grip and a button and release it, revise it, do the usual Kaizen series of refining it until it's all perfect.
I think that if Canon or Nikon or any of the other manufacturers were doing this, we would know because it would leak that they were hiring software developers,
Yeah,
programmers.
Canon rumors would have it out within a week of them taking out a help wanted ad in the local Tokyo paper, right?
Possibly.
So how would you do 4 or 5 years of software development without it leaking? You might do it in plain sight. At least that's what I think Sony is doing.
This is what sparked our conspiracy, is the new Sony phone.
Yeah, so, right. I have the Xperia 1V here, and it's pretty amazing, especially as a camera. Because I think we're looking at the very next alpha camera in this setup right here. Sony's had the Xperia smartphones for a while. In 2019, they released the Sony Cinema Pro app, which replicated some of the features from their video cameras inside the smartphone. And then in March of 2020, Sony did a huge move. They reorganized the entire company and they merged the camera and the smartphones divisions so that they had one common leader in charge of everything. And that is such a key part of the plan because you would need these previously completely separate divisions to work closely together. And so you really need a common manager to say, hey, you work with him. And every time there's a conflict, they need somebody to resolve it. June of 2020, that same year, Sony launched an Xperia smartphone with their Sony Photography Pro app that very exactly replicated the Sony Alpha camera user interface to the point where I said, this seems ridiculous because nobody likes the Sony camera user interface, right? That's a big complaint. So why would they replicate it exactly? It made no sense to me at the time. But now it makes sense that they are building a system for E-mount lenses, a proper Sony Alpha camera, and they need to replicate the user experience to make it as seamless as possible. That Sony Photography Pro app was so weird because it did not have a shutter button on the screen, right? They wanted you to use the physical shutter button. That doesn't make any sense unless it was intended to go into a Sony Alpha camera. It did not rotate to vertically, which people hold their cameras, their smartphones vertically all the time. It didn't rotate, which is what their Sony Alpha cameras do. It only makes sense if they were providing a seamless transfer, if that was the primary goal instead of actually developing a smartphone camera app. That's not how you would go about it.
Was this your The Usual Suspects moment?
Yes, that's exactly what it was. I was looking around, it's like, oh my God, all the stuff that didn't make any sense, now it perfectly lines up. In December 2021, Sony launched the Xperia Pro I smartphone with its 1-inch sensor, which was bizarre because the lens didn't cast light across the whole sensor. It was heavily cropped, but they were really bragging about using a conventional camera sensor and talking about what a technical challenge this was. And why would you do that if you weren't going to use the entire sensor, unless the hurdle you actually needed to overcome was funding a bunch of development to integrate traditional camera hardware into a mobile operating system platform. That they did, and they produced it at scale. It makes perfect sense if this is becoming this, right? With this camera in May of 2023, they also added computational photography. So now that they've replicated the user experience, they are extending it to give us that extra value that we would expect from an Android operating system. And I think all that's left is to strip down the mobile operating system so we're not dealing with next door notifications, provide something streamlined, and then stick it in a traditional camera form factor with E-mount.
You make a really compelling argument, but can I just play the devil's advocate? Okay, so it's possible that they merged the camera and smartphone divisions because now smartphones are mainly marketed by their cameras, so they might have just wanted that overlap because they're good at cameras. It's also possible that the Xperia Pro I had the 1-inch sensor because marketing often likes to put in features that they can just brag about to seem better than other smartphones, so they could have just used the 1-inch sensor, been like, we make sensors, it's affordable for us, let's just put in the 1-inch sensor and brag about it. Could just be a marketing point. The Xperia's computational photos could just be about the fact that all smartphones are headed towards computational photography, so they'd have to keep up in that market.
That's very true, but why didn't they introduce computational photography right away? Why did they bother to replicate the Sony Alpha user interface before adding Wouldn't you have done the computational photography before adding a shutter button on the screen?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we have a pretty good argument, but I'm just trying to play both sides.
I hear you.
And then that's really all I have. I mean, Could there be a number of coincidences? Yes, but are you making a great argument? Also, yes. I mean, like the people at Sony might be like, whoa, Tony's smart, or they might be like, the Northrups are crazy. They've lost it.
If I'm wrong, I hope they adopt this
Okay.
and suddenly decide to just stick an E-mount on this. If I'm completely wrong, because you're so close. I think in 2024, 2025, they could do the last remaining steps and publish an alpha camera. And my only question is really, do they do it start at the low end and try it out and refine things so that when they do announce like a big full frame A1 Mark II or 3 based on Android, do they want to refine it at the low end, or do they want to go big?
No, they're going big flagship.
Like they did with the Sony
Yeah.
A9.
Yeah.
Do you think it might be the Sony A1 Mark II? Because that would be due in this time frame of 2024 to
No, the
2025.
form factor's too ugly for this. Wait, do you think? Maybe. Yeah. I do.
Okay.
They get, because I was thinking
For the
like,
flagship, huh?
well, yeah, because I was thinking, I said it was too ugly because I was thinking these features would all be perfect for like an entry level camera to bridge that gap between smartphones and cameras, but they gotta like, they've got to sell it to the pros first. They always do that. They always put the best technology in their newest, most expensive cameras and then let it trickle down. So
I guess we'll see. If we're right about this, I think it will take Canon and Nikon 4 to 5 years from, well, maybe today.
well, what if you're right? You might be messing it up.
Maybe.
There you go. You burned our last bridge.
I thought about not even talking about this, but then I was like, oh, it is the 30th of the month. We have to get a podcast out. So sorry about my deadlines, but I got deadlines, people. And I think it will take Canon 4 to 5 years. And I think that is such a big period of time that they might be forever behind. I'm not sure that they'll be able to catch up. I do think if this works as we hope, it could cause a pretty massive shift in buyers once people start to see all the benefits of running on the flexible Android operating system. Being able to like seamlessly and quickly upload both photos and video, being able to live stream seamlessly. I think every creator will immediately hop.
You know what I think is kind of difficult is that every camera manufacturer says those features already work even when they don't. And so all of the apps where you're supposed to offload your photos from your camera to your phone, like they all just always say they work, but they don't work well.
Well, yeah, but I know how Sony marketing works. They take their competitors and they will just show, oh, hey, this is what the Nikon is doing. This is what the Sony is
that's
doing.
true.
Look how much better the Sony is. It'll be so easy to just time file transfers between a Nikon Z8 and a Sony A1 Mark II and show that the Sony A1 Mark II is 100 times faster. Like, how compelling is that going to be?
That's true. That would be a good video. Well, I hope you're right, Tony, because I am ready to see cameras move into the present, not even the future. I just want to stick a camera in like a young person's hand and see them just seamlessly figure out how to use it because we have a whole other generation of photographers coming up and it should be easier for them.
So in the comments, let us know whether you think I'm right or am I completely wrong. And if Sony is doing this, do you think that they're wrong? And why are you so wrong?
Wait, and when do you think it's going to happen? You think this is going to come out within the next few years?
I'm thinking 2024, 2025. I think they have just the last steps. I just think they need to integrate it into the form factor and go through a bit of testing and refining.
Don't you wish we could work at one of these companies so we could see all the fun stuff in development?
I do, yeah. We have to wait years and have somebody talk to Nikkei in an interview.
Okay. Thank you, Squarespace, for making this podcast possible. If you want your very own website, what are you waiting for? It's so easy and it makes you look more professional, and it can even make you money if you sell your prints or whatever you sell. Go to squarespace.com/Chelsea, and when you're ready to buy it, use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. Thank you, Squarespace, and thank you all of you. If you want to see all of our podcasts, you can go into our podcast playlist, and we've been doing this for years and years, so we have hundreds of episodes, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.